Good morning, fellow bakers. Hope you guys are having a great November, and I have a great recipe for our Virtual Tween Baking this month. We are going to be making Cranberry Orange Scones. This recipe is pretty easy. I've got everything you need to make it. Let's go over what you will have in your kits this month to make these scones. You will have 1.5 cups of all-purpose flour. You should have 1.5 teaspoons of baking powder in this little pouch. You will have 1/4 teaspoon of salt in that little pouch. You will have, you'll have an orange, which we're going to end up zesting to get a tablespoon of orange zest. We're also going to need it to get some orange juice for some different steps in this recipe. So fresh squeezed orange juice and fresh orange zest for that. You're going to have 2 tablespoons of butter. I'm giving you guys a little like square of butter, but you're going to end up having to dice that up and then keep it in the fridge until you need it. You want it nice and cold for when it comes time to use this in the recipe. So I'm going to go ahead and stick that back in the fridge in just a second. You're going to need 1/2 cup of vanilla Greek yogurt, which I have here, and that happens to be just the size of this container here. It's like pretty much exactly 1/2 cup, so you don't even have to measure it, just use everything in your little container. You will need 3 tablespoons of honey here, and you want that room temperature. It's easier to work with and mix when it's not super cold. And again, we're going to use the orange juice, and then you're going to have some cranberries, fresh cranberries that we're going to end up dicing up. We're not using craisins for this. We're going to use some nice fresh tart cranberries. They'll be balanced out by the honey and the orange zest. It makes for a really nice bright fresh tasting scone. And then for our orange glaze, again, we'll be using some of that freshly squeezed orange juice we'll get from our orange, and we will need some confectioner's sugar, aka powdered sugar. And that's pretty much it. I'm going to give you guys a sheet of parchment paper. You're going to need just a regular like baking tray that you have at home for this. This kind of thing here, like a cookie sheet, works really well. You'll need a bowl, you'll need something to zest your orange, and you'll need something to juice your orange here. And if you don't have an orange juicer, you can really just squeeze it all into a bowl and just make sure you pick the seeds out. And you're also probably going to want a whisk and a spatula for this recipe, just to help you out, okay? So I think we should go ahead and jump right into step number 1, which is preheating our oven to 425 degrees. I've got that going. I have lined my baking sheet with parchment paper so we can check that off the list. And now I'm going to meet you guys at step number 2. All right, step number 2. In a large bowl, which we have here, we are going to whisk together our flour, baking powder, and our salt. And you guys are lucky enough, I have pre-measured those for you. So I'm going to dump in the flour, 1.5 cups there. We're going to dump in our baking powder, 1.5 teaspoons here. Want to make sure we get that all out. And then just a little bit of salt for this. It kind of brings out the other flavors. So these aren't going to be too salty or anything like that. This is more of a fruity, fresh scone. So we've got 1/4 teaspoon of salt. Dump that in. And then we're just going to give this a nice whisk, making sure all of those dry ingredients are evenly distributed in our bowl. There's, not going to be a big pocket of salt or anything like that. So we want to just give this a nice light whisk. All right, we're going to actually put this aside and move on now to step number 3. Step number 3, zest our orange. And then we're going to whisk in a tablespoon of orange zest to our dry ingredients. So that bowl we just put aside with the flour and the salt and the baking powder, we're going to add our orange zest into that. If you guys have never zested an orange before, it's really easy. You just take your little microplane or your little, grater here. And carefully, you want to watch your fingers and make sure you have an adult helping you with this if you've never done it before. You just kind of want to gently, in one direction, zest your orange. You can see it's kind of coming off the orange there. You don't want to see too much of the white underneath the peel. You just want to get that top layer of peel. If you zest it too deep and it starts to get to that white part of the peel, it starts to get a little bit bitter. So we're pretty much just going to zest this whole orange. And again, we're just being careful to watch our fingers and we're not zesting. You can see I'm kind of doing a couple and moving the orange around as I go, so I'm not zesting it too much in one spot. And like I said, that kind of helps prevent it from getting too deep into the peel and getting to that bitter part. I'm gonna pretty much end up zesting this entire orange. That should come to about a tablespoon of orange zest. And if I end up having any left, I'm just gonna throw it. I can either throw it into the scones because it won't be that much of a difference, or I can save it for the orange glaze that we're gonna make at the end for some extra orange flavor. So again, I'm just gonna zest this whole orange until I get a tablespoon. So my orange is zested. Here's my little delicious smelling pile of orange zest there. And it is pretty much exactly a tablespoon. All right, so I'm going to bring back my dry ingredients, and my oven's preheated, which is awesome. I'm gonna bring back my dry ingredients, and I'm going to take my tablespoon of orange zest, plop that right in there, and we are gonna give this a whisk. All right, and now we can move on to step number 4. So step number 4 is to cut in our cold butter, which basically just means to kind of slice it in there. We're not totally making this one homogeneous, mushy mixture. We're still gonna want little chunks of butter in there, and that's what it means when it says to cut in. So we're gonna cut in our cold butter. This has been in the fridge. And like I said in the beginning, I did cube this up. So cut in our cold cubed butter with the back of a fork or using our hands until the mixture resembles fine crumbs. So I'm going to take my butter. I've got my dry ingredients here with the orange zest mixed in. I'm going to gently kind of put that in there. And I find when I'm like cutting butter in, unless I'm making a really big batch of something, I just like to use my clean hands. It kind of helps me feel how big the little crumbles of butter are. And what I'm doing is I'm just taking my hands and I'm kind of just taking these little chunks of butter and just kind of doing this with my fingers. I'm just basically crumbling it up even more. So you want the butter pieces nice and coated in flour, and you're just gonna kind of crumble them up. And you can use your whole hand like this. But again, you don't want this butter to get too soft and too melty, because then you don't want this mixture to be like mushy. You do want like individual little like tiny crumb-sized pieces of butter in here. And that will help add to the texture of the scones after they bake. And this smells so good with that orange zest that we did. And I can tell you, when we make that orange glaze at the end, it just adds such a nice orange, fresh flavor. When I'm baking, I try to use a lot of fresh ingredients. You know, if I could, you know, cheat a little bit and use orange extract if I wanted to, but why would I do that when I could use a fresh orange? And it might be 1 or 2 extra little steps, but I think it's worth it to use the fresh fruit when you can. All right, so we're almost there. I'm just crumbling, crumbling, crumbling. I can feel my little butter pieces are kind of getting smaller. And I think this is probably, I'll show you guys with the camera, this is probably a good place for me to stop. We don't want to overmix it and overwork it. We do want to keep those little tiny pieces of butter in there. So if you look at my mixture here, you can see it kind of does look like fine crumbs, almost like sand. It's not super mushy, it's not super wet looking, and that is what we are looking for. So that part's done. Now we're gonna move on to step number 5, where we are going to juice our orange. All right, time to juice our orange. So we did zest it already, so it looks a little funky, but we're just gonna use the juice from the inside, so that doesn't matter that it doesn't have that peel on the outside. We're gonna end up needing orange juice for 2 different parts of this recipe. One for the actual dough, and then the other part of the juice will be for the orange glaze at the end. So we're gonna need a total of 4 tablespoons of fresh orange juice. Going into this dry ingredient mixture, we're only gonna need 3 tablespoons, and we're going to reserve that extra 1 tablespoon for our glaze at the end. So what I'm gonna do here is carefully, again, have a grown-up help you if you've never juiced an orange before. It's not too difficult, but you will need to cut it in half, like this, carefully. And if you have like a citrus juicer, that works great. Otherwise, just squeeze it carefully, watch your eyes, squeeze it right into a separate bowl, and then you can kind of measure out what you need. I'm gonna use my juicer here and just kind of press this and twist it and get all that juice out. You can see that juice is going in the bottom. These things are great because this will kind of filter out the seeds and any pulp and stuff that you don't want in that juice. So I like this method, but if you don't have one, it's totally fine. I also have a little measuring cup here just to see where we're at. So with what I just did, like I said, we're gonna end up needing a total of 4 tablespoons. And right now, we've got almost 3, so we're gonna actually put this back on. That's what we've got so far. I'm gonna juice the other half of my orange. And it's all going down there, all that fresh, delicious orange juice, which is so good for you. Has a lot of vitamin C. It's very healthy to have fresh squeezed juice. I'm just kind of moving some of this pulp around so the juice goes down into the bottom there. Squeezing, squeezing. Smells amazing. All right, let's see where we are at with our juice. 4, so this is 4 tablespoons. I've got a little bit extra here. I can just keep that aside. I could either take a little sip of it if I want to, or I could end up, saving it for the glaze in case I need a little bit extra. That is up to you. But in our dry ingredients here, with the butter in there, we are going to need, well, I guess we can move right on to step number 6. We're going to stir in our Greek yogurt, our honey, and 3 tablespoons of that juice that we just juiced. So why don't we just go ahead and do that right now? So I've got my Greek yogurt, and it was, like I said, you guys are getting it in those like pre-measured containers. I put mine in a measuring cup just to show you it does come out to like pretty much exactly a half a cup. So we're going to drop that right in there. Half a cup of vanilla Greek yogurt. We are going to need our honey. 3 tablespoons of honey, and this might be a time where a little spatula comes in handy because this honey is very thick. It's very sticky, and sometimes you might need a little extra help to get it out of that container. Otherwise, you'll be sitting there forever waiting for it to drip out. So a spatula works really well for this to kind of scrape out any extra honey from this little container. And you might get a little sticky. It's totally fine. You just wash your hands, keep your hands clean throughout. And then 3 tablespoons of orange juice. So that juice that we just juiced from the orange and measured out. I've got 4 tablespoons here, so I'm going to pour in 3. Where's my 4? 3 tablespoons, and I'm going to reserve 1 tablespoon for our glaze at the end. So I'm just going to kind of pour it in. Another tablespoon. And that's about it. I've got a tablespoon left. Keep that aside right there. And we are going to just stir this up. This is what I have right here. I'll show you guys with the camera. That's what we're working with, mixing the wet ingredients into the dry ingredients. So now I'm just going to take my spatula and start to stir this up. And again, you don't want this to become too mushy. It's okay if there's still some little dry bits in there. That's okay. You don't want this to be a big soggy mess. With scones, it's okay if there are some little dry bits in there. When you bake it, it kind of adds to the texture. It makes it not so gummy and mushy. So I'm just kind of scraping my bowl here, using the back of my spatula to press down a little bit. We're trying to get as much of this as we can, just like ever so slightly hydrated. But again, if there's those couple little dry crumbly bits in there, that's totally fine. This is what I've got so far. You can see it's kind of coming together a bit. It's definitely not one big ball. There are some separate pieces in there. But because we did have that honey and the yogurt and all that stuff, we want to try to mix that all around. The honey and actually the Greek yogurt too are what we're using in this recipe to add a little bit of sweetness to kind of offset the tartness from the cranberries. And actually the glaze we make at the end with that confectioner's sugar will help with that too. So it adds for a really nice balance. So I'm almost there. What I'm going to be left with is, oops, this, kind of like this. And you can see it's not one big solid ball. There are some little chunks in there and stuff. And that's totally fine. We're not quite done with that. We still have to move on to the next step, which is step number 7, where we dice up our cranberries, and then we're going to kind of gently fold them in, and then we can move on to the next step, which is to shape it and bake it. But first, cranberries, step number 7. We got to dice these up. Be sure to have a grown-up help you with this step. They're in this bag here, but if you need to do this in like a couple little steps, you don't have to dump them all out. They do roll around and they can kind of get all over the place. So I'm just going to do a little bit at a time. I'm going to dice them up and then kind of throw them into my mixture as I go. And you don't need to dice these up super finely. Some larger chunks are okay. All right, cranberries are diced. I have tossed them gently into my bowl, and I'm just gonna kind of gently fold these cranberries in so that they're kind of evenly mixed throughout this scone dough. And I kept some of my cranberries on the bigger side. I don't mind, you know, a nice full little bite of tartness in there. But if you wanted to chop yours up finer, that's totally okay. All right. So cranberries are in. Everything is in. I moved my camera down so you guys can see this next step. We're going to take our baking sheet. We're almost ready to put these in the oven, but we're going to take our baking sheet. We're going to take our bowl of scone dough, and I'm just gonna dump it upside down on top of this baking sheet, and we're gonna kind of pat it into a disc and sort of pre-cut it before we bake it, sort of like a pizza. So I'll show you what I'm talking about. I'm gonna take my bowl, do this. You can see I've got this big blob of dough now. And I've got a couple, it looks like little pockets of like bigger cranberry spots. So if you need to move some of your dough around to spread things out, this is the time to do it before you bake it. But you can see it's already kind of in like a disc or circle shape. So just to spread this out a little more, I'm just gonna kind of pat it down. And if you need to put a little more flour on your hands, if you have any flour, or if you just use your palm like I'm doing, you can. It kind of helps the dough from sticking. And we're just gonna make this disc so it's about 3/4 of an inch thick. And that'll help it bake nice and evenly. We want it pretty much the same thickness all throughout. And we want to keep it in a nice circle here. And I'm just kind of adjusting some of these cranberries. I like the way they look when you can see their really pretty red color of their skin. So if some of them are upside down, I'm just kind of pressing them in like this so you can see the pretty color. All right, just about there. This smells awesome with that orange zest, and I can see the little bits of orange that we whisked into there. All right, so this is what we are left with. This beautiful disc of scone dough. And now I'm just gonna cut this into 8 slices. Again, kind of like I'm cutting a pizza. So I'm gonna cut it in half all the way through. And then I'm gonna cut it in half again. So right now we've got 2, and now I'm cutting those halves in half. So now we have 4 slices. And then each of these fourths, can you guys see? 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm gonna cut those in half, and then we're going to be left with 8 slices. Scones are one of the few baked goods that you pre-slice before baking. You could even cut this into like little rounds, like little individual bites, doing using a cookie cutter. I've done that before too. But this recipe calls for us to cut it this way, so we're gonna do this. This is kind of the traditional way to cut scones. All right. So here we are left with our disc of cranberry orange scone dough cut into 8 triangle wedges. And now our oven is fully preheated. We're gonna pop this in the oven for about 20 to 23 minutes. I'll probably check it at about 20 minutes. And we're looking for it to be lightly golden on top. We don't want to over bake it, but we do want a little bit of golden brown on top. So I will meet you guys when I pull this out of the oven, and then we will work on making our fresh orange juice glaze to top these with. All right, scones are out of the oven. Beautifully golden brown on top. So those are going to be cooling for a little bit longer. Mine's been cooling for a few minutes, so this isn't like piping hot, so I can move the tray around. We're gonna put these aside, and we are going to work on our fresh orange glaze, and then we're gonna dump that, and then we can dig in. So I'm gonna put this aside. Turned my oven off. All right, so let's work on our fresh orange glaze. I have here, pre-measured for you guys, 1 cup of powdered sugar. We're gonna dump that in a bowl, and you will need a whisk or a fork for this step. And remember that extra 1 tablespoon of orange juice that we put aside after we juiced it? Now it's coming into play, so we're going to dump this over our sugar. And I know it looks like that's not enough liquid, but we're gonna mix this, and if we need a couple more drops, I did have a couple extra drops of orange juice, or if you need to add a little extra couple drops of either milk or water to thin it out a little bit, you can do that. Let's see how thick it is though once we kind of mix this up a bit. It's actually surprising, like every time I make glaze, I'm like, there's definitely not enough liquid, and then it ends up kind of hydrating as you go. But you can see I'm probably gonna need a couple more drops of orange juice in mine. It's kind of all clumped in my whisk right now, so I'm gonna take a little bit extra of that juice I reserved. And again, if you need to add a little bit of water or milk, just a little bit goes a long way when making a glaze like this. So we're gonna stir it. Whisk it, and it's kind of, you gotta whisk it kind of hard, but it's kind of starting to form that glaze now. There we go. Now we're working with it. This smells amazing. All right, keep whisking. If you need to add a little bit more, add just a couple drops at a time. There we go. You kind of want this thicker than you think. If it's too thin of a glaze, it's just gonna run right off the scones. But actually, I think we're actually getting to a good place here. I'm whisking it until I can get all of those powdered sugar clumps out of it. We're almost there. We want to be left with a nice, smooth glaze. How pretty. No more little chunks in there. All right. I think mine's at a good spot. You can see it is like liquid enough where it's dripping off of my whisk, but thick enough where, you know, it's not like pure liquid. It's gonna hold its shape a little bit when we throw it on there. We drizzle it on there. So I'm going to put my whisk aside, and then I will show you guys how I'm going to kind of glaze my scones. All right, so you've got 2 options here. Here are our scones. You can either give them one more little cut along the lines where we cut them into 8 pieces just to really divide them, and then pour your glaze on. Or if you want to cut them and then like separate them so that they're like individual pieces. By the way, how beautiful is that? You can kind of do that and then put glaze on each one. I'm gonna keep mine in a circle. I'm gonna take a spatula and my glaze, and I'm just gonna kind of start to evenly drizzle it all over. And what it's gonna do is kind of spread out a bit and form more of like an even layer on top. But we wanna try to make sure that each scone, get some glaze on it. And the scones are still warm, so again, that glaze is gonna spread out a little bit. It's gonna be kind of melty. Oh my goodness, you guys. How pretty. This is gorgeous. This is gonna be so good. Making sure if there's any like, you know, real bare spots, get a little bit of glaze on there. That's why a spatula is great. You can kind of work with it, move it around a bit. That one needs a little bit more. But I love the kind of like rustic look of this. It's not too cookie cutter. It's not too pristine looking. It looks homemade. It looks like it was made with love, and it looks like it was made with beautiful, fresh ingredients. Because it was. So I think we are in a good spot there. You guys, check this out. Look at our beautiful scones, cranberry orange scones with a homemade fresh orange glaze. I cannot wait to try one of these. I'm thinking, man, Christmas morning, like Thanksgiving, I don't know, like this is like such a great seasonal holiday treat with the fresh ingredients, the cranberries. I hope you guys enjoy your scones. I would love to see pictures. Please send them to me if you can. Let me know how you liked them. I hope you like this recipe. I know it was a little bit more labor intensive, but I promise it's worth it. And I hope you guys can share these and share the love this holiday season. Thank you so much for watching. Enjoy your scones, you guys, and have a great November. And I will see you next month for another episode of Tween Baking. Bye.